What's up, Front Yard family? Jay here with my good friend Jeff Bell of Football Guys and the Denver Royale, here to talk about Justin Fields' fantasy outlook for the 2022 season. Jeff, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. What do you like about Justin Fields for this upcoming season?
Yeah, we can dive into ratios and we can talk about percentages that he struggled in and paint the picture that he really struggled at quarterback. We're playing fantasy football, and fantasy football is a statistical accumulation game. And only 7 rookie quarterbacks have thrown for at least 1,850 yards while rushing for 420 yards. Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, Robert Griffin, Kyler Murray, Cam Newton, Vince Young, and Justin Fields. These are all quarterbacks that at least at some point of their career, Vince Young, Robert Griffin, a little bit shorter window, they really mattered for fantasy football. So Justin Fields can do all the things that you're looking for fantasy football. He's positioned very similarly to the way Jalen Hurts was coming into last season, his second season, and the way Josh Allen was coming into his second season. You look last year, Jalen Hurts' primary target was Devonta Smith, or they had Zach Ertz, they had Dallas Goedert at tight end. Whereas Josh Allen in his year two, his best wide receivers were John Brown and Cole Beasley. Now, Justin Fields, he's got Darnell Mooney, he's got Cole Kmet. I think that those targets are perfectly fine for what you're really looking for as a quarterback. The reality of it is NFL passing trees don't spread the ball out. They're not scanning the whole field. They're really primarily using one half of the field. They're using 2 wide receivers to work within tandem from each other to open each other up. And Mooney and Kmet have both shown that ability. With Mooney clearing 1,000 yards last year, he's somebody that I'm comfortable with him being a primary target for Justin Fields. The biggest thing is Matt Nagy and Matt Nagy's coaching. So last year, Nagy only used Fields on 2.9% of RPOs for his pass attempts. And that's not utilizing his skill set at all. That's no, not at all. That's where Matt Ryan was used and players like that. Most mobile quarterbacks clear at least 15% of their pass attempts off RPOs in the modern NFL game. And so that is the thing that, as you want to look at Trevor Lawrence and we all said he's a generational quarterback, but we're giving him a free pass for Urban Meyer. You have to do the same thing for Justin Fields and Matt Nagy.
Well, I knew when I asked you to be on and talk about Justin Fields that we get a few Trevor Lawrence shots in there. It didn't take too long to get there. But yeah, that's the first thing I wrote down from my notes was Matt Nagy's gone. Andy Dalton's gone, who was for some reason Matt Nagy's guy. This is Fields' team now. He doesn't have the coach that didn't want him. He doesn't have the quarterback that the Bears signed for big money for some odd reason. And the new offensive coordinator, Getsy, is his scheme is going to work to Justin Fields' strengths, which is deep balls and rollouts. Justin Fields was one of the best quarterbacks outside of the pocket. He had the best passer rating on design rollouts. Matt Nagy only called 19 design rollouts for him. That alone tells you he was inept, but that's another story for another day. Justin Fields can throw the deep ball great. He was number 2 in air yards per attempt, number 12 with deep ball completion, and he was also number 3 in red zone accuracy, which doesn't really necessarily attribute to the deep ball, but just another positive for him. Fields did, as the season went along, especially his last 5 games, he started to play better. And while he struggled as a passer, he made up for it on the ground. He rushed for 420 yards in 10 games started. He did play in 12 games, but started 10 of them, which was the 5th most. And he actually had more rushing yards per attempt than Jalen Hurts, who is everybody's darling this season. Everybody's talking about how he could potentially finish as the QB1. Well, Justin Fields is better than him on the ground on a per attempt basis. And as you know, Mr. Ohio State fan over there, he was a very capable passer in college, so it's not like he's not able to do it. 2019, he threw for over 3,200 yards, 14 touchdowns. In the COVID-shortened season in 2020, in 8 games, he threw for over 2,100 yards and 22 touchdowns. So it's not like he can't do it. I'm with you. Before I started doing some research for this video, I was in on him a little bit, but the more I'm looking into Justin Fields, the more I'm really starting to like what I see.
Yeah, and I think he's a player that he might be one of the most misunderstood young quarterbacks because really in college, he was a phenomenal passer and he almost rarely rushed, especially his first year as a starter. Their backup quarterback was a walk-on. They really didn't use him in the run game at all, and he shredded defenses through the air. And I think that that's something that people I see so often that he's inaccurate. PFF did a study on all the college quarterbacks over like the history that they had data for, and Justin Field was the single most accurate quarterback in that study of all college quarterbacks. This dude has a professional arm, one of the best arms in the NFL, and he's accurate as heck when he gets it rolling. And I think that you just again, we go back to that RPO, you go back to that rollout. Matt Nagy was not putting him in a position to succeed. Not only that, Allen Robinson was kind of dogging last year, and I think that that's part of the reality too. And you go back to they weren't even practicing together, and I don't know how you can have a coach that you take a quarterback with the 11th pick, but you're not even going to have him practice with the number one wide receiver. There were just so many things about the Bears last year that I'm willing to give a free pass to Justin Fields on.
Yeah, and I'm with you. You made a really good point. Everybody's talking about giving Trevor Lawrence a free pass. You don't really hear that with Justin Fields, and he deserves it just as much, if not more, to be honest with you. But let's go ahead and look at some of the negatives going into this season. What are some things that could hold Justin Fields back for this season?
He absolutely needs to speed up the clock in his head. He holds the ball too long. It's something that he did in college and he was able to get away with because the receiver talent at Ohio State, the offensive line talent, the mismatches in most games, that was something he struggled with. He needs to bring that college accuracy to the NFL field. He didn't have it last year, but you can go back and it was there. It just wasn't consistent. And that's one of the things that they've talked about this offseason, improving that consistency, making sure it's there. And then can he survive behind this offensive line? Because this offensive line might be the worst offensive line in football. They're very much in a rebuild. And I think that factors in because you have a young quarterback there. He's going to be running for his life potentially. But again, that goes back to Getsy. I think that Getsy is going to do a lot more creative action, involve the run game, involve that RPO game. He's really got a strong college background. I think he's going to bring a lot of college run concepts. I expect they're going to use both David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert quite frequently. And that's really what I want to see after that. And using that RPO, using that play action is going to freeze those rushers as well and give Justin Fields just that little bit of extra beat to get the ball out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it, even though we are giving him a pass for a lot of what happened last season, you do have to take consideration he was ranked near the bottom or at the bottom in a ton of different categories. Catchable pass rate, QBR, clean pocket completion percentage, play action completion percentage, accuracy. I mean, there's a lot more than that. With that being said, hopefully Getsy, having a system that's going to play to his strengths changes that. And while I do like Darnell Mooney and I do like Cole Kmet, overall, he does lack the weapons. I like Mooney a lot, but I don't feel like he's that alpha wide receiver like Allen Robinson when he's actually trying and not dragging behind trying to get out of town. And you said it as well. He's got to get speed up the clock in his head. He's held on too long to the ball trying to get that deep pass. And with an offensive line like the Bears have, that's not going to work. So that's something that he also needs to improve. Hopefully with the scheme that Getsy sets up for him, that will be something that he can improve on as well. Let's go ahead and jump into the name game. And basically what that's going to be is I've got 5 players who are around Justin Fields' ADP currently. Justin Fields, according to 4for4, is going off the board as QB 17. And even as we get closer to the season and ADPs adjust and change, I expect these 5 players to go around him. So you're on the clock. These 2 players are available. Jeff, who are you going to draft? Let's go ahead and just get right into it. Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields?
Justin Fields.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a little tough. You would have asked me this question 3 months ago, I might have said Trevor Lawrence, but I'm starting to come along to Justin Fields. I think they both have similar ceilings. I know you don't necessarily agree about Lawrence, but Fields has a much higher floor with that rushing upside.
Well, and I would say that they have different ceilings too because of that rushing, because I don't think Lawrence is mobile enough, but Lawrence is not going to be a player that can get you, 40, 50 rushing yards in a game quite frequently.
That's fair.
He's got athleticism that translates to being able to throw on the move and things like that, but it's just not the same level as Fields.
No, absolutely. That's fair. Well, speaking of athleticism, not actually, Matt Ryan or Justin Fields?
Still Fields. And I don't know if we're talking about Superflex one quarterback, but again, this is just
It could be
two
either one.
players that, yeah, it's just two players that are completely different. It's Justin Fields just has a higher ceiling than these players in the ranges he's going in. And we were talking pre-show a little bit about like the risk, and there's not risk involved in Justin Fields in a one quarterback league because of the depth of one quarterback. You're not really going to be drafting him to be your starting quarterback one in most situations where you're only starting one quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's Justin Fields for me, and it's not even close. There's a lot of people that seem to be in on Matt Ryan this season. I think Matt Ryan's going to be fine, but yes, they've got a great offensive line. It's a run first team. Michael Pittman, yeah, he's good, but it's not like Matt Ryan's going to air it out at this point in his career. That's not what this team is designed to do. I think Matt Ryan is a okay QB2 for Superflex leagues, but you don't win leagues by drafting the okay guys. You win leagues by drafting the guys who can make that leap into the next tier, and that's Justin Fields. So next up, we're looking at Tua Tagovailoa or Justin Fields.
Still Justin Fields. Again, Tua does have that athleticism, and he's kind of been held back because he was injured coming into the NFL, and he is excellent on RPO. Adding Tyreek Hill, that adds an extra element to the Dolphins offense, and they could be in a very explosive offense. But again, Justin Fields has that rushing that we've already seen, 400 yards in starting 10 games, that 40 yards per game is really a magic number. And if you go back to Lamar Jackson's breakout year, he had 80 yards per game, that 2019 season that he broke records. Most players, think back to like Tyrod Taylor, when he was a quarterback one, he was at 40 yards per game. It's really, if you're at 40 yards per game, that kind of breaks things a little bit for rushing for a quarterback.
Yeah, in a 4-point touchdown leagues for quarterbacks, you're basically getting an extra touchdown already. 6 point, that's a little different, but still, it's close enough. This one is really tough for me because I am all in on the Dolphins offense from a fantasy perspective. I think that Mike McDaniel is going to use both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle very creatively, even if, there's been talks if Tua can get the ball down the field or not. I don't think it matters. I think they're going to use Hill and bubble screens and stuff like that. And those yards after the catch count just as much for the quarterback in fantasy as they do for the wide receiver. I've changed my mind in my head about 6 times since we've been talking. Right now, I'm going to go Tua. It's honestly a coin flip. The big thing for me is I like the weapons that Tua has better than I do Fields. If Fields just had one other guy, I would probably go with him. And honestly, that might change as we go. So flip a coin between these two, but right now I lean Tua. Next one up is Derek Carr or Justin Fields.
Still Justin Fields. And I understand the excitement behind Derek Carr. I understand having Devonta Adams, and that makes things interesting. This just goes back to the depth at the quarterback position. And I can't talk about it enough because you can have Aaron Rodgers and then go take Justin Fields. And Justin Fields' upside is a top 6 quarterback. And as much as you don't want to buy in it, as much as you're worried about the weapons, as much as you're worried about development, that rushing just breaks things. It's just the way that it is.
Yeah, Derek Carr is another play that I'm very high on this season with Devonta Adams coming into town. Got Hunter Renfrow, you've got Darren Waller, who I think is going to have a much better season. I do think that Derek Carr can be back in that MVP conversation. Not necessarily he's going to be the NFL MVP. That's not what I'm saying, but I think he can have that type of season that has him in the conversation. With that being said, you hit the nail on the head when it comes to fantasy. Give me the quarterback that's going to rush the ball. That's just such a cheat code. I'm going to go Justin Fields here. And the last one, Kirk Cousins or Justin Fields.
Again, Justin Fields. And I just want everybody to understand the reason why I'm going with Justin Fields on all of these is because these quarterbacks don't have that extra added element. And when, think about this, where you have, let's talk about 30 rushing yards, 40 rushing yards. That's 4 points. So if you're in a league where that's 25 points per yard, 40 rushing yards is 125 yards through the air. And so if Justin Fields throws for just 200 yards, these quarterbacks have to be hitting 325 yards, which will put them towards the league leaders in passing yards. And they're not going to add that element. So if Justin Fields is able to hit 200, 250 passing yards and 60 or 70 rushing yards, you're just talking about something completely different.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm very high on Kirk Cousins. I think he definitely gets way too much hate when it comes to fantasy because of his performance on this big stage in real games that matter. He puts up the stats. He's got Justin Jefferson. He's got Adam Thielen. He's got Dalvin Cook in the backfield. He's got some fantastic weapons. And I do think Kirk Cousins is a rock solid QB2 for Superflex leagues. I would still take Fields if I was on the clock. I would take Fields over him. With that being said, these last two guys that we were talking about in 1 QB leagues, Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins, those are the type of players I would target to pair with Justin Fields. That way you've got your the guys that are going to be solid contributors. Take Justin Fields. If he takes that next step, like you said, Carr and Cousins, they are what they are. They're solid QB2s who can, have that QB1 week here or there, but aren't going to finish in the top 12. Justin Fields is that guy that can do it. So when I'm building a 1 QB team, pair those types of players together, and hopefully, Fields can make the jump.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at especially 1 quarterback leagues, tier breaking is the biggest thing with quarterbacks. And I know that Brady had great numbers last year. Tom Brady ended up towards the year, I think he ended up quarterback 2 or 3, something like that. But when you look at your drafts right now, you've got Josh Allen, you've got Kyler Murray, you've got Justin Herbert, you've got Patrick Mahomes, you've got Jalen Hurts, and you've got Lamar Jackson, and they have a different element that the next group does. And the next group are kind of those veterans, Matt Stafford, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Dak Prescott. They can get there, but it's much more risky, and they have a much smaller window of how they have to get there because they have to have so much passing volume. Whereas that first group, they're just a tier above. And that's the reality of it is if they hit their perfect ideal scenario, they are going to give you a marginable difference. You can get a veteran quarterback out of that second tier and then pair them with Justin Fields. And if Justin Fields clicks, he's in that first group. He's jumping all of those. And that's the thing that people need to understand. Trey Lance is kind of the same thing. People are more willing to buy in on Trey Lance, one, because we didn't see him fail quite as much as we saw with Justin Fields, but two, the weapons around him are completely different. We got more trust in Kyle Shanahan. We have more trust in that 49ers offense. And that's fair. That's worth merit. But they're two very similar players that they're very, very questionable. And personally, the way that unless you're in a very deep league and a 1 quarterback league, if you've got 5 or 6 bench spots, don't have a backup quarterback unless it's one of these guys, unless it's Justin Fields or Trey Lance pairing with that veteran quarterback, because the value is so much higher. Whereas I like Derek Carr and I could maybe get there with him. But again, it's one of these, like, I couldn't envision rostering Matt Ryan in a 1 quarterback league unless it was something where I had like 15 bench spots and I knew that the quarterback pool was going to be very, very shallow.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up Trey Lance. I'm looking up his ADP right now. He's going off the board as QB 13. I've seen him go even higher than that in a lot of places. And I think the thing with these two players is it's the value. It was like Lamar Jackson in 2019 versus Lamar Jackson in 2020. Lamar Jackson won people leagues because of where you took him. He was basically free. And even if he would have had a 2020-like season where he disappointed and still had a good season, it wouldn't have mattered as much. But when you're taking these guys at their ceiling, when you're drafting all the risk, then you're putting yourself in a bad situation. That's why I like Justin Fields so much. Is you're not buying the risk. It's basically risk-free. If you're getting him as QB 17 and he doesn't work out, okay, there's guys in the waiver wire. If you pair him with another viable quarterback, you're fine. Trey Lance, you're going to have to overdraft him in a lot of places, and it's just not worth the risk for me.
Yeah. And then real quick on Superflex, I can, if you're more there on Tua, more there on Derek Carr, more there on Kirk Cousins in Superflex, and we're not talking dynasty, just a one-off Superflex, I can understand that you wanting a little bit more safety and security in that quarterback 2 spot. And that is a different conversation. But again, it's just the importance and the ability that he can kind of jump that middle tier there, that back half quarterback 1 tier.
Right. For me, when it comes to a guy like Fields and Superflex or a guy like Derek Carr, it depends on your first quarterback. If you've got a Patrick Mahomes, a Lamar Jackson, a Kyler Murray, then you've got the room to take the risk with Justin Fields. Now, if you wind up with Aaron Rodgers, who I still think is going to be good this season, but there's definitely question marks. Dak Prescott, those guys who are, we don't know. They could be in that top tier, but there's definitely some question marks around them, and you want that security of the Derek Carr, of the Kirk Cousins as your QB2. That makes complete sense. That's going to be it for the Justin Fields Fantasy Outlook for 2022. Make sure you give the video a like and subscribe to Front Yard Fantasy on YouTube. We're going to have a lot more fantasy outlooks coming as the season continues to creep closer.